Now we move on to creating our second game throughout the course. We're going to be combining NS timers and if statements which we've learnt about in our previous lectures. The game we're going to be creating is a basic reaction game. And what we're going to do is press our button which is going to trigger a countdown. As soon as that countdown reaches 0, we then have to press a button as quickly as we can to kind of test our reactions. The quicker we press the button, the less our score would be, and the longer it takes us to press the button, the more our score would be. And obviously the winner would be the person with the lowest score. So that's basically what we're going to be creating in our second application. So there's a few things we need to set up to create this. We need 2 labels. We have this one in here. I'm going to space it out, and I simply write in there like something like get ready. If I spell it correctly, get ready. We have our button which we're going to be working with. This will be our start button and also the one we got to press, so we'll be using this for multiple actions. And I'll copy and paste this as our secondary label, as this will be the label then that will kind of tell us our score and how long we're going to basically be counting for. So we can put that at 0. There we go. So what's going to happen then, we press our button, our get ready label at the top will start counting down 3, 2, 1, 0. And as soon as it hits 0, we then be able to press our button and see how long it takes us to kind of react to that change and see what our score comes at the end. It's going to be a brilliant and fun little game that we're going to create. So we've got these 3 objects. What we need to do now is create some outlets for them and actions. So make sure we go to our viewcontroller.h and in within it, first we're going to create our space and then parentheses there, as we need to create 2 sets of timers and ints, one for the countdown and one for the score. So we do ns timer space asterisk, and I'll simply name this timer and now a semicolon. We're also going to create an int for that countdown, so we do int space count int, there we go. And then the second ns timer space asterisk, I name this timer score. Ooh. There we go. And then a second int, and this one will be our score int. There we go. So we've got 2 sets there. We're going to create our outlet for our label. So this will be our get ready label. Our secondary label here, this will be our timer label, so like as the time goes up when we get in our score, so timer label. And then we also need our button, which will be our start/stop button. So start stop is what we will call it, making sure that's on action. Touch them inside's fine and connect that up into our project. Okay, so we got our NS timers, our ints, our 2 labels, and our start and stop button. Okay, so we need to create this in stages to make sure that it's working. The first thing you need to do is set up for the timer to count down at the start. So the 3, 2, 1, and as soon as it hits 0, that's when we need to react. So we're going to create that timer first. So what we're going to do then, in our start button, we're going to space it out. We're going to get our count int, which is the, if I go back to our .h, which is our first NS timer one. So we got our count int to simply equal the number 3, as it's going to start 3, 2, 1. We're then going to display that self dot the name of our label, our get ready label dot text, is then going to equal an NS string space string with format. Our symbol, 2 quotation marks, we do a comma, and then our count int, and that's going to display it within it. So we do the percentage sign and the letter I, and make sure we finish at that with a semicolon. We're then going to trigger our timer, so equal our 2 brackets there, ns timer space scheduled timer with timer interval. We need the one with a target and a selector, and that's going to count down at a 1 second pace, so we keep refreshing itself every 1 second. In the target, we do self. In the selector, we do at selector, and we'll come back to that in just a second before we set up our void statement. Our user info, we do nil, and repeats, we do yes. Now, we've learned about NS timers and how they work in our previous lectures. If you haven't checked that out, I recommend you do so. So now we're going to create that void statement that we need to add into our selector. So we do bracket void and have a bracket there. And this will be our start counter. Create our 2 parentheses there. And rename this selector to start counter. There we go. So we've set that up. And by doing that, we're then going to space this down as well. We're going to get our count int to start taking away 1. Oh, make sure it's minus equals space 1. Taking away 1 every second it refreshes and updates. And if, now we've learned about if statements before in one of our previous lectures, if our count int is equal to 0, so as soon as it hits 0, we're then going to get a bracket, our simple timer, which we've named our first NS timer, to invalidate. So we'll stop the timer as soon as it hits that, and we end that with a semicolon. We also need to make sure that we haven't added it in just yet, that we get our self.getReady label to display this update as it occurs. So what we can really do is just copy and paste this line we've already added in and paste it in there. That's only in here, this line, to display our count int displaying 3. We need to place it in our updated statement. As this gets updated every second, we need to make sure that it's counting and updating. So if you go to build and run quickly and test it out to make sure that it's doing what we've told it to do. So we press our button, it should count down 3, 2, 1, hit 0, and it invalidates it as it says if count equals 0, then timer invalidate. So it just simply stops the timer from counting down any further. Now, once the counter is hit 0, we then want our second counter to start counting up as fast as possible. This is where our reaction game comes into play. So as soon as it hits 0, our second counter starts counting up really, really fast, and we can only stop that counter from counting when we hit our button again, which is where the reaction game comes into play. Now, the quicker you hit that button, the smaller or the less your score will be, which means, the lower the score, the quicker you are, the more you're going to win. As if you gave it to a friend and they took longer to press it, then that means they've got worse reactions and basically they're a lot slower and you won the game. So that's how it's going to work. So as soon as count int equals 0, and invalidates itself, we're then going to continue from this and have our score int to simply equal 0. And once it equals 0, we are then going to self.timer label.text. Get this timer label to equal our scores int, as we did that with our previous int, to equal our bracket ns string space string with format to @ 2 quotation marks comma, and it's going to equal our score int. And we go back and we change this to our percentage sign and the letter I, making sure we've ended up with a bracket and a semicolon. And then once it's done that, we also need to create a secondary NS timer, as we did in our .h, which we go back to it. So we got our second one, which is our timer score. So what we do here, just like we've done in our previous NS timer, so we do timer score space equals space bracket NS timer space scheduled timer with time interval, one with the target and the selector. And this one, we want this to count up really, really fast. So what I'm going to do is 0.001. So that's going to count in really fast and kind of gives us a more realistic reaction time. In the target, we're going to do self. In the selector, we do @selector. And we'll come back to it in just a second. We do nil in the user info. And repeat, we do yes, as we want to keep repeating and getting that score. So what we can do then, if I scroll down, I'll space this out so we can clearly see what we're typing. We're going to create our second void statement in this class. So we do dash bracket void, and this one will be our score kind of counter. So we've got our start counter, and this will be our score counter. Now our score counter is going to count up our score plus equals 1. So we're counting up 1 every 0.001 second. And now that is going to count up really quick. So that's going to count up every second is going to be 1,000 in score. So which will give us kind of a more realistic score output and kind of make your friends or you, when you're competing to see who's got a quicker reaction time, it just doesn't round it up to the nearest 1. It's going to round it up to the nearest 1,000, which will make it more challenging and kind of more competitive. So we've got that there, and then we need to have our self. We can simply copy this here, place it in, making sure that our timer label is being updated with this scores int. So we've got this score counter, we need to place it into our selector, so score counter, there we go. So if we build and run to make sure this is working, so we press our button, as soon as it hits 0, it stops that counter and begins our new one. And as you can see, now it is increasing really, really, really quick. Now what we need to do is have the ability to press this button and stop this counter. As it is at the moment, you press it and it will re-trigger everything going off again, and then it kind of creates a fuss with everything that's happening. So we need to fix this and make sure that you got it all working and set up. So what we need to do now is work with the button. We first need to make sure that if the score is equal to 0, then it can only perform this task. If the score is not equal to 0, then that's when we need to be able to make the ability to stop it. So we're going to create our if statement. So basically we can do it at the start. So if basically our score int is equal to 0, then if I just go over to this line here and then place it just here. So if score int equals 0, we then can only perform the countdown to begin to play the game. Else, if the score doesn't equal that, the only other option then we've got is to then press the button to stop the score counting, which will give us our timer's score. But we need to make sure that we've got this set in our viewDidLoad. So the score int will equal 0, and that with a semicolon. So when we play the game for the first time, our score int's already preset to 0, because the only time it ever gets set to 0 is when we reach 0 in our countdown on our 3, 2, 1. So we've got that all set up. We also need to make sure that we've got that placed in within our kind of section here. So if I just copy this timer label here and place that in, so that is for when we restart the game. Because when we restart the game, we're going to have that equal to 0. What we're then also going to get to do is change what is being displayed within our button. So if we do bracket sender space set title, if I can just find it now. There we go. In our NS string, we'll do @ 2 quotation marks, and we're going to put in the words stop in that array bracket there. For state, we do our colon here. We do UI control state normal, which you can find it just there, and that bracket and the semicolon. So when we play our button, it's then going to change the text within it to our stop. So that means we now get a visual notification that we can now press the button to stop our timer to get our reaction time. So what we're going to do is jump into our main.storyboard and just simply change our button so it's already saying start. Okay. So if we go to build and run and quickly test it out, before we do, we actually need to add in our time invalidate. So just after our bracket here, we do else space bracket enter, and then we do bracket time score in value date. There we go. So basically what's happening then, if the score int does not equal 0, and next time we press it, which is going to have the stop title, it's going to invalidate our timer score. So this time if we go to build and run and test it out, we should now have the ability to stop the timer and get our reaction score. So if we count it down, so it goes 3, 2, 1, it then performs our second NS timer, which starts counting up really fast, and you can see our button has now changed to stop. So if I press this button, it stops that timer, so we can now see that our reaction time was 620. So we can play it again and try and beat our reaction time. But at the moment, you can see that our stop button says stop. And we can't press it and we can't restart the game basically, so we're now stuck. So how are we going to restart the game? Which is pretty simple. We then need to create a second if statement. So this time, if our counter has now stopped on our button, so just down below, so if statement here, our count int is now equal to 0. In the highlighted section here, we can have our score int then equals 0 as we're resetting our score int. And by resetting our score int means the next time we press our button, it's going to read this if statement back to 0. So we then kind of refreshing the whole system. We're going back to the start, which will run through the game again, get to the end. And then once we press our button, it resets it back to the start. So it's a kind of continual process of a big loop of playing the game over and over. We then need to, or last thing we need to do is basically change what's being displayed in our button. So we paste this in within our new if statement and change this to start. So it gives our users visual confirmation of what the button's going to do when it gets pressed. So this time, for the final time, if we go to build and run, we should now be able to play the game over and over again and get new scores. So we press our button, it starts the countdown for us, ready to go, and then we get ready, press our button, stopped. So this time we've got a reaction time of 61. So if I go to press start this time, or alternatively, we could have it change it back to restart, which I'll probably do now. So restart, which is good enough. Build and run that. So countdown again, we'll start again. 3, 2, 1, and this time I got a reaction time of 42. It then says restart, so it means users go, oh, okay, I can restart the game. So I press it, it restarts both timers back down to 0, and it goes back down there, and I press stop. This time I didn't do as good, I got 135, so let's try again. And again it restarts and creates this loop of this game over and over again, and I press it again, and this time I got 42, which is the same as what I got first time. So yeah, I need to work on my reaction times. But there we go, we've created our second application, and it's the start of a brilliant reaction time game. Maybe as you go on further through the course and you learn more and more stuff on application development, you could kind of create this application a lot further. You could add in, leaderboards, you could add the ability to post your score to friends. You could even change up the whole system, and instead of the 3, 2, 1, add images in and create like a traffic light system where it goes red, amber, and as soon as it hits green, then the counter starts to go up, and then you got to press and react to it. So there's a lot of possibilities of where you can take this game and develop it into a full working playable game. It's quite addictive, you try and beat yourself over and over again. Let's see if I can beat 42. I should be able to. 42 again. Wow, let's give it once more. You can see how addictive it is because I want to keep playing it. 25. Okay, there we go. So your challenge is to try and beat 25, or at least develop this application a lot further and see what else you can add into it. So there we go, our second full application on developing our own reaction game. It's the first of many games that we're going to be creating throughout this course, and the next coming lectures we're going to be talking about changing and kind of styling some of the objects within our view, such as hiding it, enabling and disabling, and even fading in and out some of the objects within our view.